There was something eerily perfect about Vivian Rose. She wasn't the kind of woman who turned heads with youth or bold fashion choices. No, her allure was quieter, more deliberate. She had that timeless elegance, the sort that didn't seek attention but held it effortlessly. At 42, she moved with the kind of grace only hardship and charm could teach. Evan Miller, 38, thought he'd stumbled upon something extraordinary. After a painful divorce and years of half-hearted dating, he met Vivian through a small, elite matchmaking agency, one his mother had practically begged him to try. He almost canceled the first meeting, but the moment she walked into that cozy cafe on Main Street, dressed in soft ivory and speaking in a warm southern drawl, Evan felt something click. "She's unlike anyone I've ever met," he told his best friend Kyle after their third date. And it was true. Vivian was calm, witty in a subtle way, and had a disarming attentiveness. She remembered every detail, how he liked his coffee, when he broke his ankle in college, even which Beatles song brought tears to his eyes. Within 3 months, they were engaged. By month 5, they stood together in a rose-draped chapel outside Asheville, North Carolina, exchanging vows before a small group of close friends and barely any family. Evan had been married once before, though he rarely spoke about it. Not even to Kyle. Her name was Dana. They met in college, 2 awkward sophomores navigating young love. She was spontaneous, wild in a way that made life exciting. But 8 years into their marriage, Evan discovered she'd been having an affair with a co-worker for nearly 2 years. Dana hadn't cried. She didn't even seem sorry. "You made everything too ordinary," she told him. "I stopped feeling special." Those words clung to him like smoke. The years that followed were hollow. Evan built walls around his heart, convinced he wasn't the kind of man who got to be loved deeply. He buried himself in work, avoided relationships, and looked after his mother, who was in the early stages of dementia. She'd always been cold, elegant, and deeply religious. As a boy, he remembered her saying things like, "Love is a transaction, and women want strength, not sensitivity." He never realized how deeply that had shaped him until Vivian. Vivian was soft where Dana had been sharp. She was tender in ways he didn't know he craved. With her, he felt seen, and that terrified him, because deep down, he feared he was never truly enough. So when Vivian whispered, "You're everything I've ever wanted," he let himself believe it. When she reached for his hand and recalled his favorite wine, he melted. And when she kissed him under the flowered arch that morning, he clung to her and whispered, "Please, don't leave me." She looked at him and said, "I'm not like the others." He wanted to believe her. So much it ached. Caldo found something strange. "Where's her family?" he asked Evan quietly before the ceremony. "Just her and a cousin in Michigan," Evan answered, brushing it off. "She's not close with the rest. Most of them are gone." Kyle raised an eyebrow, but let it go. Still, something about Vivian itched at his gut. Too perfect, too private, too practiced in sorrow. Later that evening, with a bourbon in hand, Kyle did what any good friend would do. He started Googling. Her name wasn't unusual, but when he searched Vivian Rose with marriage and missing, a few curious results popped up. 2 obituaries. Each listed Vivian as the spouse of men who had vanished or died, quietly without fuss. No mention of foul play. No family comments. Just cryptic notes about private arrangements. Kyle's stomach turned. He looked up. There was Evan, dancing under the canopy of string lights, Vivian's head resting on his shoulder. Her eyes were closed, serene, like she'd been waiting for this moment her whole life. Peaceful. Too peaceful. That night, back at the inn, Evan lay beside her. One of her hands rested gently on his chest. Her skin smelled like lavender and something else. Something old. Something foreign. "Do you ever think," she whispered, "how strange it is to finally find the right one?" He turned to her. "I think about it every day." She smiled into the dark. "Let's promise each other something." "What's that?" he asked. "No secrets. Ever." Evan nodded. But deep inside, something stirred. Outside, a quiet storm rolled over mountains. The first time Evan felt genuine fear was 10 days after their honeymoon. It was a Tuesday, the kind of dim Carolina evening that smelled like wet pine and old earth. He came home early, hoping to surprise her with dinner. Cooking wasn't his strength, but she always smiled when he tried. Chicken piccata, her favorite. She mentioned it once, briefly, over wine. Vivian noticed everything. He just didn't know she noticed too much. The moment he stepped inside, the air felt wrong. No soft music, no candlelight, no scent of her signature vanilla rose candles. No Vivian. Then he heard it, a faint thud, a door somewhere below. The basement. He followed the sound silently, careful with each step. The basement door was slightly open, something she had always kept closed. It was always locked. Vivian claimed the basement was cluttered with useless junk and memories too heavy to hold on to. But tonight, she had forgotten. Inside, the air was cool and still. The walls were lined with carefully labeled boxes, winter coats, old photos, books. All neat, all normal, except one. It was wedged behind a shelf, crooked, as if it didn't belong. No label, just a black smudge, like something had tried to erase its past. Evan reached for it. Evan. Her voice cut the silence like a blade. He jerked around. Vivian stood at the top of the stairs, her face lost in shadow. "What are you doing?" she asked, her tone smooth, but her eyes locked onto his hands like a hawk. I thought I heard something." The door was open. She descended slowly, her silk robe brushing the banister like a whisper. "That box isn't important," she said, closing the lid with gentle insistence. "Just old tax files." He nodded, said nothing, but something twisted deep in his gut. That night, she was more affectionate than usual. She rubbed his shoulders, lit the fireplace, poured his whiskey neat. Her lips brushed his ear. "No secrets," she whispered, a reminder cloaked in warmth. 3 days later, Kyle called. "You still want to know what I found?" His voice was low, cautious. Evan stepped outside, away from Vivian's ever-watchful presence. "I'm listening." Kyle exhaled. There were 2 obituaries. Both men married to a woman named Vivian, or someone using that name. One in Georgia, one in Oregon. Died under strange circumstances. No foul play listed. Just disappeared. Evan's stomach flipped. Could be coincidence. Kyle scoffed. "There's more. The Oregon guy, Mark Shell. His brother posted on a missing persons forum years ago. Swore Mark's wife had something to do with it, but never had proof. Included a wedding photo." Kyle paused. "Evan, it's her. Same eyes. Same smile." Evan sat hard on the porch steps, his breath gone. "What do I do?" Kyle was quiet, then said, "Play it cool. Stay alert. And if she ever offers you a drink that smells off, don't touch it." That night, Evan couldn't sleep. Vivian lay beside him like a statue, her breath rising in slow, perfect rhythm. In the moonlight, she looked ethereal, almost too flawless. His thoughts spun. Who was she? Why were there no childhood photos? No social media? No wedding albums from her past? It was like she didn't exist before 2010. The next day, while Vivian was out at her book club, Evan made his move. He returned to the basement. This time, he pulled the mysterious box fully into light. There were no tax files. Inside was a bundle of old passports, each with her face, but under different names. 6 marriage certificates. One was his. There were newspaper clippings with ominous headlines. "Local man disappears after wedding. Wife declines to comment. Foul play not suspected." At the bottom, a small velvet box. Inside were 5 identical gold wedding bands, lined up like trophies. A cold shiver raced down his spine. His hands shook. She had kept them. All of them. When she returned later that afternoon, Evan was back on the couch, eyes closed, feigning sleep. But everything had changed. His heart raced with dread, his mind echoing with a horrifying truth. He was number 6. No one else had made it past 5. Still, he smiled when she kissed his forehead and handed him a warm cup of tea. But this time, he didn't drink it. 3 nights later it happened. Evan hadn't told Kyle yet. He was still unraveling it all, the passports, the rings, the headlines. He barely slept. Every time he moved, he felt Vivian's gaze. Even when she wasn't there, that evening, she brought him a cup of chamomile tea. He hadn't asked for it. He was sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the muted television. "You've been tense lately," she said, smiling gently. "I thought this might help." Her voice was soft. Her robe carried the scent of cedarwood and vanilla. He took the cup. His hands trembled. She curled up across from him, watching. "I'm fine," he said. "Just work stress." She tilted her head. "I can tell when you're lying, Evan. You don't have to with me." He forced a smile. "It's nothing." She leaned closer. Her voice was barely a breath. "I would never hurt you." Every cell in his body screamed. He raised the cup, paused just long enough for her to notice. But she didn't blink. She simply waited. He touched it to his lips, pretended to sip. Instantly, he caught it in the steam, something bitter beneath the floral, a metallic tang that didn't belong. His heart raced. He coughed lightly. "Hot," he muttered. She nodded, serene. Take your time. Minutes passed. She stood, humming softly, and began folding a nearby blanket. Quietly, Evan rose and slipped into the kitchen. Evan dumped the tea, rinsed the cup, and replaced it with a glass of water. Then darkness. He woke hours later on the bedroom floor, head pounding, vision swimming, limbs heavy like soaked sandbags. Vivian sat calmly at the edge of the bed, watching. I know you didn't drink all of it, she said gently, but you drank enough. Evan tried to move. Nothing. His arms were numb, unresponsive. I never wanted to hurt you, she continued, her tone soft, almost regretful. But you've started digging. Her voice wasn't angry, not cold, just disappointed. You opened the box, she said, brushing damp hair from his forehead. I saw the scuff marks. You were careful, Evan, but not careful enough. She leaned closer. I should end it now. Clean. Easy. He tried to speak, but his throat wouldn't work. But here's the thing, she whispered. You're different. You looked. The others, they never did. They trusted too easily. They made me feel invisible, like I wasn't real, like furniture. She smiled, faint and almost fond. But not you. Evan shut his eyes, bracing for the worst, for cold steel, for silence, for nothing. Instead, she kissed his cheek and whispered, let's try again. Maybe you'll understand me better this time. And then she was gone. He woke at dawn, fully clothed in bed. No wounds, no bruises, just a bitter taste on his tongue and cold sweat along his spine. Vivian was in the kitchen, cooking eggs. She turned, smiled like the night before never happened. Morning, sleepyhead. You passed out last night. Stress, maybe? He stared at her, frozen. She kissed his cheek. I'm just glad you're okay. He sat down, hands trembling under the table. And that's when the truth hit him. She could have killed him, but she didn't. She didn't want to end him. She wanted to be seen. This wasn't over. It was only the beginning. From that moment, Evan Miller stopped being a husband. He became a survivor. He still kissed her, still told her he loved her. But every smile was calculated. Every meal she made felt like a test. Every soft-spoken word, like an interrogation. Outwardly, he was perfect, loving, attentive, the man she expected. Inside, he was preparing for war. He bought a hidden camera disguised as a phone charger, planted one in the bedroom, another in the kitchen, one more above the basement door. Every night, he backed up the footage to a private drive, encrypted and buried beneath a folder labeled Work Reports. Then he called Kyle. I need help, he said. She's dangerous. Kyle drove in from Atlanta that weekend, pretending to be just another old friend. They drank beers on the patio while Vivian baked lemon cake inside. She's charming, Kyle said aloud. Then quietly, she's watching us. She always is, Evan murmured. They strolled to the edge of the yard, pretending to admire the flowers. I found 5 rings, Evan whispered. And passports, all with her face, different names. Every husband disappeared. Kyle's jaw tightened. This isn't just strange. It's serial. Evan nodded. I think she drugs them, waits until they're weak, then makes them vanish. What's the plan? Evan exhaled slowly. I'm going to let her try, and I'll catch her in the act. The setup began the next week. He played the part, sluggish, disoriented. He skipped meals, lingered in bed, complained of headaches and dizziness. It wasn't hard. He was already exhausted. Vivian was doting, concerned. You're overworking, she cooed, stroking his hair. Let me make you tea. I'll stop by the pharmacy. Just rest, sweetheart. She brought him tea. He pretended to sip. Later, while she was watering plants, he poured it into a plastic bag and froze it. Kyle had a friend in the lab. 2 days later, the results came back. High dose of zolpidem, Kyle said. Mixed with alcohol. It could stop your heart. Evan didn't flinch. He knew. The 3rd Friday, she suggested they celebrate their mini-month anniversary. She brought wine, bourbon glazed salmon, and that same lemon cake. She poured his drink herself, watching closely. To us, she said sweetly, raising her glass. Evan lifted his, then yawned. I'm beat. Mind if I crash early? Of course not, she said, kissing his cheek. I'll clean up. Upstairs, Evan swapped into clothes soaked with fake sweat and sticky syrup. He lay on the bed, eyes half shut, breathing shallow. The stairs creaked. Vivian entered, silent as a ghost. She leaned down, breath warm on his skin. Sleep tight, Evan, she whispered. It'll all be over soon. Then silence. He waited. Then came movement downstairs. Furniture scraping, a metal clang, a creaking door. The basement. She was setting the stage. He rolled off the bed and tapped his phone. The hidden camera below began streaming live to Kyle's laptop. Kyle, already watching from his car, called the local sheriff. They were on standby, fully briefed. Evan crept down the stairs. Through a narrow crack in the basement door, he saw her. Vivian, straining to lift a tarp-wrapped bundle into the large chest freezer. Not food, not storage, Jim. She turned, pulling a syringe from her robe. "Just one more night," she muttered. Evan stepped into view. "Looking for this?" She froze, turned slowly. Her face shifted. First confusion, then calculation. "You're supposed to be asleep," she said, almost amused. "I bet they all were." Neither moved. Then she lunged. Evan sidestepped, grabbed her wrist, twisted the syringe away. She fought like a wild animal, scratching, biting, screaming. He held on just long enough. The front door crashed open. Deputies stormed the house, guns drawn, lights sweeping the walls. Vivian went still, her face unreadable. She looked at Evan, not with rage, with respect. "I wondered how long it would take," she whispered. They handcuffed her beside the basement door. She didn't cry, didn't plead. She raised her wrists like she'd been waiting for this moment all along. "Be careful," Evan told them. "She's smarter than she looks." "We've seen plenty of pretty sociopaths," one deputy muttered. But even he looked at her twice. Then they found the freezer. Inside, 5 vacuum-sealed bags, labeled in faded black marker. Mark Shelley, 2013. Daniel Ross, 2014. Anthony Lively, 2016. Henry Morris, 2018. David Quinn, 2020. All husbands. All missing. All accounted for at last. Next to the freezer, behind a false panel, they found the vault, climate-controlled, impeccably organized. Watches, love letters, wallets, passport copies, each piece labeled, preserved, treasured. "This isn't just murder," the lead detective said, voice low. "This is ritual." Evan stood in the corner, alive, but forever changed. Evan stood in the basement, shaking, numb. The sight of 5 lives reduced to ashes and mementos nearly shattered him. Among the carefully labeled freezer bags, he recognized one of the watches. He remembered Vivian wearing it once, saying it had belonged to an uncle. Minutes later, Kyle arrived, breathless and pale. "You okay, man?" Evan barely nodded. "She almost got me," he whispered. At the station, Vivian remained silent for hours. No lawyer, no resistance. Just silence. Then, past midnight, she finally spoke. "I never lied," she said softly. "They knew who I was. I was the best thing that ever happened to them." Detective Morales leaned in. "You killed them?" Vivian tilted her head slightly. "No, I freed them." By morning, the story exploded nationwide. Black Widow killer arrested in North Carolina, suspected in 5 missing person cases. Media descended like vultures. Who was she? How had no one seen the pattern? Her real name wasn't Vivian Rose. It was Lillian Monroe, born in 1981. Orphaned after a suspicious house fire. She grew up in foster care, her file riddled with red flags, violent outbursts, stabbings, suspensions. At 18, she vanished. 3 years later, she resurfaced in Oregon under a new name, Veronica Ray, and married her first victim. Authorities later traced at least 7 aliases, each tied to a missing man. She never stayed more than 2 years. Every new identity was a reinvention. New look, new voice, new history. And every departure left behind questions instead of corpses. Until now. Further searches at the house revealed more horrors. Beneath the basement floorboards, cadaver dogs signaled a hidden chamber. Inside were chemical drums, likely used to dissolve remains before cremation, and journals. Dozens of them, bound in soft cream-colored leather. The journals were stored meticulously in a lacquered wooden box. Each was labeled by year, sealed with a red ribbon. They weren't stashed like secrets. They were displayed like trophies, neatly written in graceful cursive. The pages chronicled her life in chilling detail. Every man was cataloged. Mark, Daniel, Anthony, Henry, David, and finally, Evan. She wrote with eerie clarity. Mark was kind but dull. He forgot anniversaries, left dishes in the sink. He raised his voice once. I gave him 3 warnings. The 4th came with a drink. Henry cried when I said I was leaving. Weakness repulses me. I brewed his final tea that night, lavender and cyanide. She didn't kill from rage. She killed for control, for perfection. Her victims weren't murdered. They were discarded like flawed prototypes. The journals outlined her twisted philosophy. She scored each man, noting how long it took them to forget to compliment her, how often they checked their phones at dinner, how they handled her silence. Emotional infractions were logged with clinical precision. They promised love, she wrote, but brought rust. I simply clean house. One entire volume was devoted to psychological strategy, manipulating affection, punishing doubt with distance, rewarding obedience with touch. She described Evan more extensively than any other. He noticed too much, moved too quietly. I began testing him earlier than usual. When he found the box, I let him believe he was safe. I needed to see if he'd run or fight. Detective Morales read through every journal. When he finally closed the last one, he whispered, "She didn't kill out of anger. She killed like she was performing maintenance." A young officer asked, "Why keep the journals?" Morales replied, "To be remembered." The final entry, dated 2025, contained only a poem. Some build statues, some write songs that I build echoes, and bury wrongs. Signed simply V, but there was no journal for the first man. No ribbon, no cursive, no poem, only a memory. She was 23, living in Portland under the name Eliza Warren. She worked at a bookstore, renting a studio above a flower shop. It rained constantly. She liked that. The sound masked everything. His name was Derek Malone, a professor, 10 years older. Confident, charming. He called her his wild thing, told her she was mysterious, special, his undoing. At first, she believed him, until she saw how he treated a barista, how his hand lingered too long, until he said, "You remind me of my daughter when she was younger." It always began with a moment, something small that fractured the illusion. She didn't use poison that time. That came later. Derek died by a hammer. She waited until he was asleep, belly up, limbs sprawled like a king. She stood over him for 10 minutes, watching, waiting. Then she struck, once in the forehead, once in the temple. He never woke up. He was the beginning. Evan was almost the end. But now, thanks to a survivor who refused to be another chapter, her story, Lillian Monroe's story, was finally over. Or so they hoped. He opened his eyes. She didn't panic. Calmly, methodically, she wrapped the body in a sheet, cleaned the blood, disassembled the bed frame, scrubbed the floor with lemon-scented bleach. The next morning, she called the flower shop downstairs and told them she'd be gone for a few days. Family emergency. Then she rented a van. She drove 3 hours east into rural nowhere, an empty patch of land behind Forgotten Barn. There, she dug a grave herself. It took nearly 7 hours. Her hands blistered. Her back ached. But when it was over, she felt nothing. No guilt, no joy, just silence. The next day, she cut her hair, burned every photo of them together, and walked into a DMV with forged documents. That's the day Eliza Warren ceased to exist. She became Veronica Ray. She never said Derek's name again, never wrote it down. But years later, in a journal about another man, she left a single, haunting line. The first goodbye is always the quietest. Evan sat in the hallway of the station, listening to the soft clink of the coffee machine, staring at the wall. "You saved lives," Kyle said, sitting beside him. "She would have done it again." Evan nodded, but his face didn't change. "I loved her," he whispered, his voice catching. "I really did." Kyle placed a hand on his shoulder. "You loved a mask." Evan didn't reply. Before her transfer of federal custody, Vivian requested one last meeting. With Evan, he hesitated, then agreed. They sat across from each other, separated by thick glass, a prison foam between them. She wore no makeup. Her hair was pulled back tight, still elegant, still composed. "I suppose this is goodbye," she said. Evan stared at her. "Why me?" She gave a small, sad smile. "You were different, smarter. I thought maybe you'd last longer." "And the others?" he asked. "Disappointments," she said simply, then leaned closer to the glass. "If I'd met you first, Evan, maybe none of this would have happened." He hung up without answering. As he walked away, she tapped the glass once and smiled. Long before she became Vivian Rose, she was Lillian Monroe, a little girl with strawberry blonde curls and a mother who hummed lullabies even through tears. That's how the neighbors remembered her. But Lillian never spoke of her childhood. Not to Evan, not to police, not even in court. The truth came in pieces. through old files, psychiatric reports, and the fragments left behind by those who dared look too closely. She was 6 when the house caught fire. Her parents were asleep. Lillian, the only survivor, was found curled in the hallway, untouched by smoke. Investigators called it an accident, faulty wiring, but a matchbox was found under her bed. Her clothes smelled faintly of gasoline. No charges were filed. The case was closed. Lillian was sent into foster care. Between the ages of 7 and 17, she lived in 9 different homes. Her file was a parade of red flags, violent outbursts, disturbing drawings, manipulative behavior. One therapist wrote, "Lillian mimics emotion well, but does not appear to feel it. She displays detachment from consequences." Another observed, "She thrives when adored, but when attention fades, she becomes dangerous." At 15, she was accused of pushing a foster brother down the stairs. He survived with a broken leg and a fractured sense of safety. At 17, she disappeared, vanishing weeks before her 18th birthday. 2 years later, she reappeared as Veronica Ray. In Oregon, no one knew it was her. The identity was flawless. She worked at a flower shop, sang in the church choir, wore pastels, gave cookies to the mailman. Then she met Mark Shell at a farmer's market. They married after 6 months. Less than a year later, he vanished on a solo camping trip. No body, no trace. She moved, changed her name, again and again. Each man followed the same rhythm. Charm, seduce, isolate, eliminate. Not one of them saw it coming. None of them survived. What drove her? Some said power, the thrill of control. Others pointed to trauma. Childhood twisted her, they claimed, left her hollow, hungry for attention, addicted to possession. But her journals told a different story. In an entry dated just months before her arrest, she wrote, "Love is a test. A man must prove himself daily. The moment he slips, I remind him who I am." Another line read, "Some people collect stamps. I collect goodbyes." She never stole their money, never drained their accounts. Most of her victims' finances were left untouched. She didn't kill for profit. She killed for that one moment, when the man realized the woman he loved wasn't real. That flicker of betrayal, that panic, that dependence, that was her high. She was a flame. They were the moths. And Evan? He was the only one who didn't burn. In custody, she became legend. Psychologists visited. Criminologists studied her. Writers begged for interviews. She declined them all, except one, a young therapist named Dr. Megan Holloway, who reminded Vivian of herself. During their final recorded session, Dr. Holloway asked, "Do you regret any of it?" Vivian tilted her head. "Regret?" she repeated. "I regret choosing men who believed love didn't need polishing. I regret thinking they could ever match me. What about Evan?" Vivian smiled. "He passed the test. That's why he's still alive." To the world, Vivian Rose was a monster in makeup. But behind the mask, Lillian Monroe was something far more dangerous. A woman who wore empathy like a dress, took love like a loan, and returned nothing but ash. 6 months later, the headlines faded. The world had moved on to newer, louder horrors. But for Evan Miller, time hadn't moved at all. Time didn't heal anything, it just sharpened the edges. Evan Miller left the house in Asheville behind. He couldn't bear the echoes of her voice in the halls, the way her whispers still seemed to cling to the walls. He moved to a small cabin deep in the woods near Boone, North Carolina. Isolated, quiet, but peace never came. Not after the trial. Vivian Lillian Monroe had sat silent through every court session. Her defense team pleaded diminished capacity. The prosecution came back harder. Premeditation, a clear pattern, and a soul twisted beyond redemption. The jury didn't need long. Life in a federal penitentiary. No parole, no appeals. She smiled when they read the sentence. But prison wasn't the end of her story. Vivian was sent to a maximum security facility in West Virginia. Every hallway lined with cameras, every movement under surveillance. Guards in pairs. Controlled interactions. Limited contact. None of it mattered. Within 2 weeks, she knew the names of everyone on her block, guards, nurses, inmates. By week 4, she knew which officer's mother was sick, who was going through a divorce, who took antidepressants, and most importantly, who wanted to be seen. Officer Ryan Griggs was young, disciplined, but eager to please. The kind of man who wanted respect, but never quite knew how to earn it. Vivian noticed immediately. She didn't flirt. That would have been too obvious. She was kind, soft-spoken, curious. She asked about his day. his schedule, whether he was sleeping enough. One morning after breakfast, she told him, "You remind me of someone I knew. He had strong hands, kind hands." He didn't respond. But the next day, she got an extra packet of sugar in her tea. By the third week, he lingered by her cell door. She said nothing, just smiled, let silence work for her. One night, Officer Griggs stood outside the warden's office for 7 minutes. He never knocked, just turned around and walked away. Vivian never asked him for anything. She didn't need to. A few days later, she received a second blanket, a rare winter privilege. Then her mail started arriving uncensored. On the 5th week, she was caught in the library reading a restricted file. When questioned, she simply smiled and said, "It was sitting there. I assumed it was meant for me." Nothing stuck, but security was quietly shuffled, and Officer Griggs was reassigned to the medical wing's night shift. He didn't say goodbye, but a note appeared under her door. "You were right. They don't see me. But you did." Vivian tucked it away, one more piece for her collection. She didn't need violence to escape. All she needed was access and an audience. That's when she met Layla Torres. Just 19, foster care product, arrested for assault and grand theft, kept in isolation for her temper. Their first encounter was in the infirmary. Vivian had bruises from a fall. Layla's knuckles were split from punching a wall. They sat in silence until Vivian quietly said, "Anger is a leash, and you keep handing them the handle." Layla looked up, startled. "What?" Vivian smiled softly. "You want them to fear you, not pity you." Layla didn't respond. But that day, she stopped spitting at the guards. Over the next few weeks, they were often placed near each other. Coincidence? Of course. Vivian never lectured, just observed. You're not stupid. You see the patterns. You know when someone's lying. They'll try to fix you because they think you're broken. But what if you're not? By week 3, Layla was following her, first with her eyes, then with her steps. She started asking questions. "Why are you always calm? Don't you care what they did to you? Did you really kill those men?" Vivian never answered directly. But one day, she handed Layla a torn page from a book. On it, she had written, "Weakness is predictable. Control is sacred." Layla folded it into a square and hid it in her shoe. A week later, she stopped fighting. She asked for books instead of yard time, requested to be moved to Vivian's block. The request was denied, but change had started. At night, Layla whispered Vivian's words to herself. "You don't have to scream to be heard. Men don't like women who see too much. That's their first mistake. Never cry in front of a man who calls you his girl." She began writing in a notebook. Not her past, not regrets, just fragments, thoughts, survival. She cut her hair, asked the guards to call her V. One night, a nurse found a note tucked under her pillow. "There's more than one way to survive a cage. Some rot, some hide, some build legacies. V." Vivian never admitted to giving it to her, never acknowledged it. But one afternoon, as they passed each other on the track, their eyes met. Vivian smiled. Back in Boone, Evan tried to move forward. He returned to work, joined a survivors group. Most had lost family to accidents or cancer. Not a woman, who almost froze him alive in a basement. "You're lucky," they said. He nodded, but luck didn't explain the dreams. He saw her often, barefoot in the hallway, in white, watching. Then came the letter. No return address. Just his name in that same delicate script she used on the tea jars. "Dear Evan, I replay it often. The look on your face when you found the box. The tremble in your hands. And most of all, how you still kiss me goodnight after you knew. You were brave. You passed the test. They never did. Do you miss me? I miss you. In silence. In memory. You were my favorite goodbye. V." His hands went cold. She wasn't finished. Not even from behind bars. Vivian didn't need knives. She didn't need to escape. Her presence was enough. 3 weeks later, Kyle received a letter too. No name. No address. Just his name in blocky print. Inside, one line typed in courier font. "You were smart to look. That makes you dangerous." Or interesting. No signature. Just a symbol in the corner. A minimalist V. Kyle told himself it was a prank. Some twisted joke. But he kept the letter, locked in a drawer. And sometimes, late at night, he thought he heard her voice again. Evan never told anyone about the second letter he received 2 days later. Weeks passed. In town, Evan wandered into a bookstore. The owner gently offered him a new release from the true crime shelf. He glanced at the title, Black Widow, The Vivian Rose Murders. On the back cover, a quote from the lead detective read, "Some killers want attention. She wanted permanence." Evan didn't buy the book. He didn't need to. He returned to the cabin, fed the letter into the wood stove, watched it burn. Then, for the first time in weeks, he stepped outside. The air smelled of pine and approaching fall. Life went on. But some part of him would always be trapped in that old house, still pretending to sleep, still waiting to die. And part of her was still watching. 6 months after the trial, he tried dating again. Her name was Celeste. She was kind, warm. Her smile reminded him of someone, though he couldn't place who. She reached across the table once. He flinched. She smiled politely. The date ended early. His therapist called them psychosomatic symptoms. Nausea at the smell of chamomile, panic in dim lighting, a tremor in his left hand that came and went like a ghost. He stopped using mugs, only drank from sealed bottles, locked every door, slept with a flashlight under his pillow. He kept her letter. Sometimes, he swore it still smelled faintly of her perfume. Other times, he brought it close to flame, watched the edges curl, then smooth it out again. Some scars you fold, some you frame. In therapy, someone asked, "What makes a survivor different from a victim?" Evan didn't answer. Not then. But later, in his journal, he wrote, "A victim dies once. A survivor dies 1,000 times. Every time they wake from a dream, touch a memory, wonder if it's over. And still they breathe." Eventually, Evan moved deeper into the mountains. No neighbors, no mailbox, no internet, just a wind with a chop and silence to manage. He wasn't running from her. He was learning to live with her, to give her room in his mind, but not the whole house. Then one spring morning, he found a letter tucked into his screen door. No stamp, no address, just a torn sheet of journal paper. "You were always the exception. And even now, I wonder what you're building out there. Maybe it's peace. Maybe it's a trap. V." Evan read it once, then fed it to the fire. He told no one. He didn't run. He went back to carving wood in silence, listening to the wind press against the glass. Vivian Rose was still behind bars, but she had never needed freedom. To be free. If this story chilled you to the bone, leave a comment below.